on this Tuesday night.
Tomorrow is another important step, but there are many more steps to follow.
Canada takes a giant leap into uncharted territory, legal pot. But dealers, they don't seem so worried.
If you're happy continuing buying from the black market, continue to do so. We'll still be here.
From public safety to public health, we break down what's at stake.
It's a shame. It's a travesty.
More than a decade after Ashley Smith died, isolated in prison, Ottawa responds. But did the government go far enough?
And 3 weeks until the U.S. midterms, so we go in depth.
This election is This is a really important election.
Who's up, who's down, do all those polls matter? Our panel of political insiders on why the U.S. midterms are a Canadian concern. This is The National.
Canada is turning the page on 95 years of cannabis as an illegal drug, just the second country in the world to do so. It is historic and polarizing, allowing adults to use it for fun. But even as pot goes legit, it will be governed by more regulations than ever before. It will test long-held opinions on drug use, and it will change the fabric of Canadian life, even if most of you never plan on trying it. Tonight, we'll see how doctors are challenging the government over medical concerns. We'll get the lowdown from an illicit dealer on how the world of black market pot is adapting. And we'll track the country's very first legal sales in St. John's. But first, the CBC's Catherine Cullen kicks off our coverage with the government's big bet on legalization.
I see my friend waving a sign about decriminalizing cannabis. I'll take that as a question.
From back then,
I'm in favor of legalizing it, tax and regulate.
To now, pot stores, some government-run, ready if tomorrow customers are lined up out the door.
For the brand new user, the 70-year-old grandmother who's curious, and we expect some people may come in just to look around.
Tonight, Canada becomes the second and largest country in the world to legalize recreational pot. No one expects the country to suddenly look like this all the time, but the Liberals have made a gamble on legalization, and there will be challenges, with some already casting blame.
They created this mess, and then they want the provinces and the police, and they said, no, you guys figure it out.
I think that Premier Ford should be very careful. This is not a partisan issue. Parliament has spoken, the legislation has been passed. This is now a public health issue.
Also a public safety issue, says Ford.
Make no mistake, by rushing legal cannabis out of the door before ensuring police have the tools they need, the Trudeau Liberals are putting people at risk.
Problem is, that's not what police say.
I'm here to tell Canadians that the police are ready.
Hey, how you doing? There are concerns about whether there are enough officers specially trained to catch high drivers, whether the tough new laws to punish them will actually be used, and the Liberals authorized new saliva tests to help detect high drivers, but many forces aren't buying them, citing the cost and questioning how well they'll work in the cold. Still, police don't sound panicked.
We have been dealing with impaired driving by drugs for many, many years.
And what about those with a criminal record for possessing something that's now legal?
We're going to be working on that, as I said, as soon as the day of legalization comes into force.
Tomorrow morning, the government is expected to announce its plans for pardons for Canadians convicted of simple pot possession, as Canada's historic shift from prohibition to legalization sets in. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, you heard the government mention this is a public health issue. But on that front, as Christine Bierek explains, some doctors fear this is all just a massive social experiment that could have lasting impacts.
As far as public health experiments go, legalizing cannabis is a biggie. The road is uncertain. The Canadian Medical Association Journal warned the government not to take it, saying the long-term health impacts could be devastating. And if more Canadians end up smoking pot, this experiment will have failed.
We don't want to find out, like we did with tobacco down the line, decades down the line, that we made a mistake and it could cause even more adverse effects than we suspect it does.
Making new research key to revealing the bigger picture. While there are many, here are 3 big questions researchers will be looking to answer. For starters, how many Canadians are actually buying and using cannabis?
I think the biggest thing is that we can now start to measure not just whether people use this, but problematic use. Much in the same way as alcohol, that many people can use it responsibly. We know some people have problematic use. That's where the conversation will go for cannabis.
For young people, pot is still illegal, but about 1 in 5 teens has smoked it anyway. Depending on how often they use it, cannabis can impact their brain development. Youth experts have learned hard lessons from tobacco and alcohol. They'll be keeping track of who is selling pot where and how is it being marketed.
Corporations are pretty capable of arranging things and packaging things and promoting things in a way that, they're not directly advertising to young people, but it does appeal to young people.
A group that's being heavily targeted in the marketing of pot is seniors. They're also the fastest growing group of cannabis users. Researchers want to know how will cannabis impact the health of seniors.
They might be taking other prescription drugs, and we don't know a lot about how cannabis interacts with other prescription drugs. So I'm particularly interested in monitoring the seniors group as well as the youth and everybody in between.
So are many other countries around the world. They too will be watching this massive experiment with pot to learn from our successes, and doctors fear our failures. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
You heard Marcus talking about undercutting the government price. In the past, the federal government has suggested $10 a gram might be enough to squeeze out criminal sales, but provinces think they'll have to go much lower. Take New Brunswick. Legal marijuana there will cost between $6 and $15 a gram, depending on the strain, which is pretty standard across the country, though it is a little cheaper in BC and Quebec. The low end there approaches $5 a gram. And while it's hard to pinpoint a price on the black market, StatsCan gave it a shot, asking pot users what they paid. In New Brunswick, it was an average of $7 a gram. In BC, $6.87, and the lowest in Canada, Quebec, at $5.83 a gram for the illegal stuff. Later in the hour, we will take you to St. John's. That's where the country's first legal cannabis sales will happen. And tomorrow, the National has it covered on all angles on day one of a new reality. Our reporters will be keeping an eye on the rollout in big cities across the country and in small towns being transformed by a burgeoning industry at the U.S. border. We'll learn how that country plans to react and what that could mean for you. Plus, we'll put some essential questions to the minister in charge, Bill Blair.
To another major change being proposed in Ottawa, this one to the way Canada deals with problem prisoners. It will replace the current version of solitary confinement, giving inmates more access to rehabilitation and mental health care. The legislation comes 5 years after a coroner's inquest into the suicide of 19-year-old prisoner Ashley Smith. But as Evan Dyer reports, some say the changes don't go far enough.
Today, Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale announced that solitary confinement is finished, replaced by strategic intervention units.
The key word there is intervention, whereas under the other system it was segregation. So the whole approach has been inverted, if you will.
It's not ending segregation. Not ending segregation for anyone with mental health issues. It's just a new name.
It's been 11 years since Ashley Smith, a 19-year-old from New Brunswick with serious mental health problems, died of self-strangulation in her solitary cell in a federal prison in Ontario. The coroner's inquest into her case helped pave the way for the changes announced today. But Ashley's mother says the changes fall far short of what she hoped for.
It's a sham. It's a travesty that it's done in Ashley's name.
Ashley Smith spent months at a time in segregation, and her mother says that's the first thing that should have changed.
We had fought for maximum 5 days and 60 days over a year, and nobody's touching that.
Under the new bill, a prisoner would be entitled to 4 hours a day outside a cell, including 2 hours of what's called meaningful contact with other people. Prisoners' rights groups say that is an improvement if it actually happens.
Even now, prisoners are often approached at 5 or 6 in the morning when it's bleak cold outside and say, would you like your hour of cell time now? And they say, no, thank you, I'd rather continue my sleep. And that would be a denial of the opportunity.
The changes are also being criticized from the other side of the equation, the guards.
We're a little bit worried because it appears in the bill that they're moving away from that disciplinary type of regime, which we need to manage the most violent behavior in our facilities, to more of a therapeutic type of unit.
The government is introducing this bill as it fights 2 lawsuits that aim to force it to end segregation, and it's hoping the changes in this bill will be enough to make those lawsuits go away. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Ottawa.
To give you an idea of just how many people this could affect, there were more than 14,000 inmates in federal institutions in the 2016-17 fiscal year. About a quarter of men and 40% of women would have spent some time in segregation. The average length of stay, 22 days, with women generally spending less time there than men.
To Turkey now, where a fresh coat of paint may be hiding a multitude of sins inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Turkey says it has uncovered new evidence that journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered there. And the New York Times reports that it has uncovered direct ties between Saudi Arabia's crown prince and at least 4 members of the Saudi squad allegedly sent to deal with Khashoggi. If verified, that would be pretty hard to explain for the Saudi royal family, who have denied any knowledge or involvement. Reports now suggest the regime is on the verge of a major reversal, possibly admitting Khashoggi was killed without the approval of Saudi leaders. And as Thomas Daigle tells us, today those leaders met with a high-profile visitor.
A friendly photo op, if there ever was one. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in Riyadh, all smiles, with the man accused abroad of orchestrating Jamal Khashoggi's apparent assassination. That's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Thank you for hosting me.
With King Salman, too, Pompeo's public demeanor hardly countered the criticism that Washington's going soft on the Saudi royals.
Allies of the Saudi Arabian government must take a strong stance protecting activists and dissidents. This is exactly what Jamal was writing about.
The U.S. president again amplified the kingdom's defense, tweeting, "Just spoke with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who totally denied any knowledge of what took place." Tonight, he added,
"If they knew about it, that would be bad."
In Istanbul, the steady stream of investigators who finally entered the Saudi consulate apparently came back with new clues. Turkey's president said toxic materials had been painted over. Turkish police reportedly found evidence Khashoggi was killed there, the last place he was seen.
2 weeks is a very long time for the probable scene of a crime not to have been subjected to a full forensic investigation.
Remember, the so-called Saudi hit squad was seen leaving the consulate, taking that black van to the Saudi consul's residence. Today, he fled the country, though the consul was seen here 10 days ago giving a tour of his offices, opening cupboards as if to bizarrely say, "There's no body hidden here." Authorities still want to search the consul's home. It's the next step in an investigation that has transfixed the world and yet offered very few clear answers. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, London.
Now, Canada's relationship with Saudi Arabia is already strained over human rights concerns. Ottawa's tweets criticizing the country sparked a diplomatic dispute that has yet to be resolved. As Murray Brewster now tells us, though, Jamal Khashoggi's disappearance has some questioning, again, whether this country should be selling light armored vehicles to Saudi Arabia.
Fundamentally, this issue is a matter of principle.
It has been the classic refrain ever since the Liberals said yes to the deal to sell armored vehicles to Saudi Arabia over the objections of human rights groups.
We will be respecting that contract.
After the international outrage over the disappearance and possible murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, the message is the same.
When it comes to existing contracts, our government believes strongly that Canada's word has to matter.
Former Canadian Ambassador Dennis Horak was kicked out of Saudi Arabia in August after this tweet criticized the jailing of human rights activists. Despite that, he is still firmly behind the arms sale.
It's a good deal for Canada.
Horak, now retired, says Canadians need to face the facts.
When countries have arms and they're in wars, they're going to use them.
And I think we have to expect that if we're going to be in the arms industry.
And that is something the Liberals would rather not talk about.
The Liberals made the calculus a very defensive and cautious calculus that we want to keep the benefits of the deal, i.e. the $15 billion and the 3,000 jobs, but we are not interested in the costs. We want to mitigate these costs as much as possible by avoiding any kind of public discussion.
A key part of that discussion for Amnesty International is how and where those labs could be used, especially along the Saudi border with Yemen.
We're selling armaments to a country where there's a very good chance they could be deployed along that violent border, that border where war crimes and human rights violations are being committed, and that's the reason we need to pull the plug on this deal.
But is that possible? These photos taken recently by CBC News show brand new armored vehicles lined up near the dock in St. John, New Brunswick, ready for shipment somewhere overseas. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
Some other stories we're following tonight on The National, including a new personal attack from Donald Trump. The president mocking Stormy Daniels today, calling her horseface. Yeah, you heard that right. The insult came, perhaps not surprisingly, in the form of a tweet in which he said, "Now I can go after horseface and her third-rate lawyer." So why'd he do that? Because it seems a federal judge in California dismissed Daniels' defamation lawsuit against Trump. That means it's open season on the name-calling, with Daniels' lawyer referring to Trump as a disgusting misogynist. And Paul Bernardo, whose very name is synonymous with his sadistic crimes, is seeking parole tomorrow. He's already spent 25 years in prison, most of that time in solitary confinement. But for those still traumatized by his crimes, this is all still very raw. He was convicted of the murders of 2 teen girls and multiple sexual assaults. The mothers of those teens, Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, are expected to address the parole board as well. Remember this guy in the story we brought you last night of a man swimming naked with sharks in Toronto? Well, he's been arrested. 37-year-old David Weaver from BC was picked up by police today in Thunder Bay. Officers say he is also wanted in connection with a violent assault which happened elsewhere in Toronto just before that aquarium stunt.
And still ahead on The National. Come From Away is coming home to Newfoundland. But for locals, just getting tickets was a struggle. You'll hear from them in our moment.
Plus, why the U.S. midterms matter on this side of the border. Just 3 weeks out from Election Day, our insiders weigh in.
Plus, David Common patrols the border alongside U.S. officials. He finds out that not all those people crossing into Canada to claim refugee status plan to stay here.
Some of those same people, American authorities are noticing, are being ruled inadmissible to Canada. And so they are making that journey back south, back into the United States. And the Border Patrol is here to stop them.
Well, the scene has become familiar to Canadians over the past year. People crossing into Canada hoping to be given refugee status. Just last month, the RCMP apprehended 1,600 people, and many of those entering the country do not qualify for asylum. Instead, they face deportation to their home country, but now some are opting to cross back into the United States illegally. David Common joined U.S. Border Patrol agents to find out how they're dealing with the influx.
Speeding right on top of the Canada-U.S. border, these American agents are not trying to be sneaky. They're impossible-to-miss jet boats sending a roaring message to border jumpers. As we ride along, the agents know exactly what they're looking for.
The ground has been disturbed, so it has more moisture that's sticking up at the top. You get the little bit of a, I don't know, like almost like sawgrass. There's tracks coming from there.
Out here, miles from any road, across a river shallow enough to walk across, footprints sound the alarm.
There's like a line of disturbance, and that's what we're looking for. So when we're driving up and down, we're looking at disturbances like that. That's more than likely a moose.
Tracks that weren't here yesterday.
We're down here every day because we need to know what normal is.
Humans have crossed right here before. These agents remember one of the first, just a few years ago.
He swam and then probably walked 5 kilometers through the woods to to get up to the highway, which at that point, a concerned citizen did make a phone call to us, and an agent intercepted it.
That border jumper, the grandson of one of the founders of Hezbollah, as it turned out, had his asylum claim in Canada rejected. So he snuck into the U.S. And over the past year, a lot more have been doing the same.
We're in the United States, and if I was to step over the ditch, I'd be in Canada.
Along the land border through Amish country where New Brunswick turns to Maine, American agents like Dennis Harmon are seeing a big rise in border jumpers heading from Canada to the U.S.
Our apprehensions this fiscal year have gone up almost 60%.
So what's going on?
It's a high-risk area for us as far as border goes.
There is the ease, of course, of going from the United States here into Canada. And of course, over the past couple of years, we have seen people traveling from south to north. But some of those same people, American authorities are noticing, are being ruled inadmissible to Canada. And so they are making that journey back south, back into the United States, and the Border Patrol is here to stop them.
We want to stop the illegal entry before it happens.
The numbers, of course, are minuscule compared to the border with Mexico, but there are worrying trends that border jumpers are bypassing the Mexican border and flying north instead. And that's opened a door.
For them to fly into Canada without a visa and then cross into the United States, then just pay a smuggling route up through the southern border out of Mexico. It's cheaper to get that airline ticket and then come across.
Their next worry is the potential for human smuggling to grow along this border. U.S. agents have stopped Canadian fishing boats throughout the summer, checking to see that migrants weren't aboard. No arrests were ever made, though the Americans say it's worth it to send a message to smugglers.
They basically don't care who they're bringing in or smuggling, and it goes both ways. You know, their bottom line is they see the human as cargo. So it's the way you and I would transport our groceries from the supermarket back to our home. That's the way they treat these people. I mean, they're a commodity.
Though Canada has long been the easier of the Americans' two borders, new threats are emerging as they focus not just on who is jumping the border into Canada, but who's coming back. David Common, CBC News on the Maine-New Brunswick borderline.
And still ahead on The National, we'll take you to Newfoundland, where shoppers can buy the country's first legal pot.
Plus, we go in depth. It is just 3 weeks until the midterms, and our political insiders are here. First order of business, why Canadians should be paying attention to these elections. That's next.
It's now only 21 days until Americans vote in the 2018 midterm elections.
It's 21 days until the election.
Things are getting intense.
Things are really heating up.
This is the time at which people who don't care about politics begin to pay attention.
The lesson from last week?
We already forgot what happened last week.
My advice for candidates in these last few days before the election is to not get distracted by shiny objects.
My advice to candidates is to talk to voters face to face every day.
What does it mean if the United States continue as it is? What will change mean? And the effectiveness of those two messages will shape the American future and the future of every country on earth that cares about what happens in the United States.
I'm Patty Solis-Doyle. I'm a Democratic strategist.
I'm Jay Shabria, and I worked for Ohio Governor John Kasich.
I'm Stephanie Brown-James, and I used to run Black voter outreach for President Obama.
My name is David Frum. I'm an editor at The Atlantic. I have been involved with American politics almost all of my life.
It is 3 weeks to go until America votes, so here's a reminder of where things stand. Right now, Republicans control both the House and the Senate, but that could change. Not sure it will. In the House of Representatives, all 435 seats are up for re-election. 219, remember that. That's the magic number for a majority. The Republicans currently hold 236 seats, but the Democrats are so hoping to make gains. And then there is the Senate. With 100 seats, it's very close right now. Republicans currently hold 51, Democrats 49. In this race, 35 seats are up for grabs, but most of those are currently held by Democrats. So this is going to be hard. They have to keep all of them. Won't be easy. Plus, they then have to pick up 2 more. Republicans just need to hang on to what they have. So we're now halfway through the campaign. Here is one latest projection on which way this could go. According to 538, which basically aggregates polls, the Democrats are poised to take back the House. They have maybe 6 and 7 chance of doing so. The Senate, that's a different story, though. Republicans are likely to hold their power there with a 4 and 5 chance. So our panel joins us now. Great to see you all. And before we, launch into it with sleeves rolled up about the polls and the issues, I kind of feel like we need to deal with the elephant in the room, and that's not the GOP. We hear a lot from people saying, why are you spending so much time talking about American politics, sort of suggesting this is rubbernecking. But when they say that, what are they missing, David?
What they're overlooking is that in this age of Trump, the global order that we've all taken for granted and that Canadians especially benefit from is coming apart. It's not enough for Canadians just to worry whether NAFTA, the trade deal between the United States and Canada, is secure. Canada has an investment in making sure that trade deals across the world are secure. And yet Donald Trump has launched these trade wars against the planet. So this is a world in which America is the center, and when America comes apart, the world comes apart.
Stephanie, do you see anything else flowing north, as it were, from these midterms?
Yes, interesting. I think about the relationship between Canada and the U.S. like me and my husband in the bed. And I mean that to say that if he moves or snores or does anything, I feel it. At the end of the day, the U.S. is still the largest economy in the world. What happens with regards to trade definitely impacts Canadians when it comes to technology or agriculture or innovation. What happens in the States policy-wise is going to impact Canadians all across the area. So I think it remains important that Canadians pay a special attention to what happens in this midterm elections, because the change in Congress could mean real changes in policies that will impact all Canadians.
Well, I certainly know that's why people are watching the House race, because that's where so much policy gets discussed. We talked about polls, but there's always a bit of hesitation to bring them up as markers of where we stand. I just don't know how to feel about polls anymore. Jay, do you think that hesitation is warranted?
Well, there's no doubt polling is broken in America and probably around the world as well, too. But what I would say is this: the way in which the media portrays polls is very different than the way political professionals use them. The media uses polls to say, this is a horse race, this is a parlor game, this is who's leading every day. We that do political campaigns every day, we look at it to see how are messages moving voters and how are we going to actually get a coalition to victory. So from that perspective, there's still a big value in polling, but from the media perspective, it's probably not as valuable as it once was.
But as the members of the public, we don't have access to all that intel. So, I mean, Patty, is there anything that people can look at instead of polls as a marker?
Yeah, I agree with Jay that if 2016 taught us anything is that polls cannot predict who's going to win, as everyone thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. I think what's a stronger indicator is where the national parties are putting their resources this close to the election. Money is running out, and so they really need to figure out which races are close enough that their additional resources can make an impact, and which races are so far gone that they're going to pull out resources. So I think, the public and viewers need to really look at where their national parties are putting the money, because that's what counts.
Okay, so if we take that theory and look at where the money's going, what is this telling us right now about who these parties are really going after? So who's the prize voter right now, David?
Well, this is sort of a race between well-educated women who are the most anti-Trump group in the electorate, and the question is, can they be mobilized, versus down-market men, who are the most down-market white men, who are the most pro-Trump group in the electorate. Can they be mobilized? With the down-market white men, you have the advantage that a lot of them are older, and older people have a higher propensity to vote. I think one of the big drags on Democratic hopes is that they have always attached a lot of significance to raising Latino turnout, people from the Spanish-speaking world, Mexico especially, but other countries too, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, which is a territory of the United States. And Latino enthusiasm seems low in this cycle. At least Latino willingness to come out and vote seems low. So that holds the Democrats back. But the incidents today where Donald Trump was on Twitter again insulting a woman, I don't know that you can raise women's disgust with President Trump past 10, but like Spinal Tap, he's taking it to 11.
Stephanie, do you buy that argument about Latino voters?
Not so much. I mean, I definitely have seen a large number of Latino voters and Black voters especially who are very much enthused about this year's midterm elections, but we cannot overlook the millennial voters who are poised to overtake baby boomers as the largest voting bloc in the country. And as we saw with Taylor Swift, who finally got vocal about politics, where over 60,000 voter registrations came from really an Instagram post, and I'm assuming most of those were millennials who registered to vote because Taylor Swift basically said so. You know, that to me is one social poll that really signifies that millennials are enthused. We know that they typically don't vote at high numbers during the midterm elections, but I think that with so many issues coming to head, talking about the economy, talking about healthcare, I think we will continue to see millennials come out in full force, not just during early vote, but really on election day too.
I don't know. You mentioned Taylor Swift and thinking about celebrity endorsements. I mean, if that actually worked, Patty, wouldn't Hillary Clinton be president now?
Yeah, I've never been a big believer in entertainers as endorsers. You know, I think most people look as entertainers to actually entertain them and not to tell them how to think politically. And you're absolutely right. You know, Hillary had every major celebrity endorse her, from Beyonce to George Clooney, and she lost. But what I do think is entertainers can be very good at rallying up your base and making sure the vote gets out. Put a celebrity in front of a bunch of, you know, door knockers and volunteers who really want to, you know, who are going to go out there and get your vote out. That's the best way to use your celebrity endorsers. I don't put a lot of stock in Kanye West going to the Oval Office or, you know, Beyonce, you know, doing a concert for a candidate.
Okay, so the last time we were all together, gang, you were all buried in your phones because the New York Times had dropped its behemoth of a story alleging tax fraud in the Trump family. And unless I'm wrong, you all thought this would be a huge deal. And then he had one of his strongest weeks in ages, even a bump in the approval rating. So, Jay, what's happening here? Is this a failure of Democrats to capitalize on that, or maybe it doesn't matter?
Well, I think Democrats have no idea how to react to the Trump presidency, and I think there's a lot of regular people that have no idea how to react, because every day, every second, there's something else that happens, and it fills our imagination of what's going to be next. So is it a failure of the Democrats? Yeah, probably, but the reality is the president has the bully pulpit, the president has the media completely controlled, and he's got Twitter. So he controls everything in terms of the way in which information is dispersed to the electorate. So I don't even know how you break through in this, but a story like the New York Times one, which is super long and super complicated, it's really hard to get any traction. And a lot of it is baked into the electorate already.
David, you were all over that story last time we spoke.
Yeah, I still think it's hugely important. I also think we need a realistic psychological model of how you lose in a country of 330 million people. I mean, it doesn't happen that your core vote smacks their foreheads and say, boy, do I feel like an idiot now. I am so sorry. Where do I send my letter of apology? You lose by fraying at the margins. So that story about Donald Trump's tax evasion, probably by means that were illegal, has been followed by another story pretty conclusively documenting that his son-in-law and chief foreign policy advisor Jared Kushner has, without breaking the law, probably paid no taxes in a decade, which is followed in turn by a story about this murder in Saudi consulate in Istanbul. And there are important business connections linking the Saudis, Trump, and Kushner. I think it's also connected to this, which is we are on the verge now. We've just had an announcement of the size of the new deficit numbers. The United States is well on its way, in the middle of prosperity, to $1 trillion deficit, which means Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, said today that if the Republicans hold, on the agenda is going to be reductions in spending for Social Security and Medicare. And that is, so one of the things that I think a lot of people, not the core Trump vote, but the weak Trump vote, is thinking, wait a minute, They had this tax cut. I didn't get much out of it. Donald Trump never paid much tax. His son-in-law pays no tax. I'm now about to have my Social Security and Medicare under pressure, and all of this is somehow linked to shady, maybe even criminal, maybe even murderous goings-on in the outside world. It comes together in a story, and it is the story that sinks you. Not all at once, not with your core vote, but with the voters whose loss means defeat.
Okay, well, unfortunately, time is always tyrannical. Not surprisingly, there's a lot more to say. We're going to have to leave it there, but we will, of course, be talking again in a couple weeks as we watch all of this unfold. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next on The National, Chris Brown takes us backstage for the debut of Canada's National Ballet in Russia.
Wrapping your head around something like this is incredible. I was trying to like it to something like the NHL or the Super, like this is it. This is what you dream of doing.
Job done. And that was it. The very first gram of legal recreational pot sold in Canada, making this only the second country after Uruguay to go legit. A couple of stores in St. John's made the inaugural sales at exactly midnight. And that store is exactly where we find our Chris O'Neill Yates. So Chris, take a moment, show us around. What's it like in there?
It's like a boutique, really. They have clothing, but they have all kinds of marijuana here. People are going around perusing what they've got. Some interesting names, Adrian. Bodie McBoatface, Balmoral, Lemon Skunk, all kinds of varieties here that people are having a look at and trying some of the clothing. The man who bought the first gram here, Ian Power, said he won't even be using that 1 gram. He's going to take it and frame it and put it on his wall, and under it put "We won." So a lot of people are very happy. There's still a lineup around the corner, so it's going to be a long night here, Adrian.
Okay, well, I know you're sticking in. Thanks very much, Chris. That's Chris O'Neill Yates in St. John's.
You're welcome.
Okay, Canada's National Ballet has made a big move all the way to the birthplace of the Nutcracker in Swan Lake, and Russian audiences appear to be impressed. For the first time ever, the National Ballet is performing in Russia, showcasing Canada's contemporary take on a very old art form. Chris Brown is there and spoke to the crowds, taking it all in.
Russia is the home of many of the world's classic ballets, but it has a more modern feel this week as Canada's National Ballet Company stages its first ever tour here, and performers such as principal dancer Greta Hodgkinson are dazzling audiences.
The audience is extremely knowledgeable, and they are also really appreciative, so especially when they really like something.
The company arrived over the weekend, and after posing for photos in front of famous landmarks, began preparing and rehearsing at Moscow's Stanislavski Theater.
Wrapping your head around something like this is incredible. I was trying to like it to something like the NHL or the Super, like this is it. This is what you dream of doing.
With almost 100 dancers and staff, international tours are already expensive enough to put together. Add in the political deep freeze between Russia and Canada, and dancers know they may not get another opportunity like this.
Canada's iconic ballet star Karen Kane, artistic director of the National Ballet, says frosty political relations with Vladimir Putin's government aren't an issue for dancers or audiences.
We share this art form that we all love, and I think that the arts can kind of exist on another level from politics.
The company was invited and most of their bills paid for by superstar Russian ballerina Diana Vishneva. She hosts this yearly festival to expose Russian audiences to new ballet treatments.
It's the quality of the company, it's the repertoire, it's the history of the company, tradition of the company.
After opening night, the Canadian company may have won over some new fans. I'm a doctor, she told us, not a ballet specialist, but I think this performance can help you recover from any disease. I am so glad I came. The Canadian tour will play a final performance Friday in St. Petersburg. Chris Brown, CBC News, Moscow.
Our moment is next. From Broadway to Toronto, now back to St. John's. The Come From Away cast is returning to Newfoundland. But this time, not everyone was lucky enough to get tickets.
They just came out and said they're almost all sold out.
The evening ones are sold out.
Okay.
It's just daytime.
But people are buying massive amounts of tickets. That's the problem.
Come From Away is going home. The hit Broadway musical celebrates Gander, Newfoundland's role in welcoming stranded passengers when their planes were diverted on September 11th. Now the cast will stage 8 shows in St. John's in the new year, and safe to say, people were excited. It's going to feature the Toronto cast and all the songs, but not exactly the same production. Still, that didn't stop crowds of people from lining up for tickets in the rain today, and that is our moment. The lineup started early, 5 a.m. kind of early, with fans eager for a chance to hear the songs up close.
Where the river meets the sea.
And so they waited and waited.
It's a long line, but we'll take our time. We'll get through it.
Yeah, it's getting hopeful here.
But a couple of hours in, the mood started to shift.
I tried online at 10 o'clock when it opened, and the system had crashed.
They just came out and said they're almost all sold out.
And then came a warning about fake tickets being resold.
To the ones you've left, you're never truly gone.
Despite all of this, people here kept their sense of humor. One person tweeting, "It's easier to buy weed than it is to buy Come From Away tickets." So I was outside the theater in Toronto where the show was on Saturday night. My parents were in there waiting for them. I've never seen people come out of a show looking so joyful. This is such a celebration, and I think the people in St. John's who haven't seen it yet are going to just be so proud of their province.
And, you know, Gander is so close to the hearts of the people in the production company. All the net proceeds are being given back to the 6 communities that took in those 7,000 passengers. So Gambo, Appleton, Gander, all of them. It's a big step.
Well, and Adrian, as you say, I mean, the proceeds are going to help people. This is a performance about helping people. And so I just hope that at the end of the day, people don't leave with a sour taste in their mouth with the ticket situation, feeling taken advantage of. But we shall see. That is the National for this October 16th. Have a good night.
Good night.